Okay, good evening, everyone. And we are holding over here in the Parsha Shavua, Parshas BeHa'aloscha. The truth of the matter is, I feel very guilty being here tonight. I'm in the middle of a massive fundraiser, and I feel like I really should be behind my desk trying to raise money. But we've been learning Bitachon all morning long for the last, it seems about 6 months, maybe 8 months already. And we know that in the world of hishtadlus, in the world of effort that a person has to make, there's only so much hishtadlus, there's only so much effort that a person has to do. There's no shortage of money in the world. There's no shortage of phone calls that will be answered in all the calls that I make. There's no shortage of hearts of certain people that will be opened up to the cause and they'll give. And it works out every single year that there's always people that I think are going to give X amount, and they surprise me and they give A amount. And then there's people that I expect to give A amount, and suddenly out of nowhere, they're giving X amount, or someone that I didn't expect at all is going to give. I don't even know the person, ends up come left field, ends up giving more than I could have anticipated. So it's all in the hands of Hashem. So why not learn Torah? If we're raising money, so we should be able to learn more Torah over here. So the learning the Torah itself is the biggest schus, brings about the most bracha, it will bring the most siyata d'shemayim. Now, there's a question in this week's parsha that it's one of those questions that you have to ask yourselves, how come I never thought of this question myself? It's such an obvious question. I'm embarrassed that I never thought of this question before, but I'm even more embarrassed because the way that the question is introduced is Yadua Hakusha. The question is well known. It's so well known that I went through this parsha, who knows how many years already, and I've thought about these psukim many, many times, and the question never, ever bothered me, and now it does. So we have at the end of towards the end of the parsha, that Moshe Rabbeinu, who has a wife whose name is Tzipora, he separates from his wife. And the reason that he separates from his wife is because he's a Navi par excellence. He's receiving nevuah all of the time. He doesn't only get nevuah when he wants, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants to give nevuah. He doesn't only get prophecy when he's sleeping, or when Hashem puts him to sleep, or when there's music playing in the background, or he's in some transcendental state. Moshe Rabbeinu can receive prophecy any single time of the day that he wants. So he said to himself the following: if Klal Yisrael was going to Har Sinai, and they're going to receive the Torah, and they had to separate from their wives for 3 days beforehand to make sure that there was no carry, there was no seminal emission before they went there. They had to be completely tahor. So I, who speak to HaKadosh Baruch Hu all of the time, there's constantly nevuah, constant revelation and prophecy that is taking place. So then how can I ever jeopardize my state of tahara, purity? And therefore he said, I have to not be with my wife. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu was maskim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu agreed to the decision that Moshe Rabbeinu made. And there's no questions at all from Hashem that Moshe Rabbeinu was doing the correct thing. So what ends up happening over here? What ends up happening is that Miriam and Aaron HaKohen, they're a little bit bothered over here how their brother Moshe could somehow just leave his wife like that. And they begin speaking Lashon Hara amongst themselves. And of course, we see that Miriam, the instigator, she ends up getting punished for the Lashon Hara, the gossip that she says afterwards. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes to the great defense of Moshe Rabbeinu, and he has to allow them to understand that you can't have any questions on the Hanhaga, on the things that Moshe does, because there is nobody in the world like Moshe Rabbeinu. And it says in the pasuk the following, and it's Vayomer Haragach Moshe Dibra Hashem. Is Moshe? They said, is Moshe Rabbeinu the only one who spoke to Hashem? Gam Banu Dibra Vayishma Hashem. We also, Miriam said, we also spoke to Hashem. We also heard HaKadosh Baruch Hu's voice. We all stood by Har Sinai. We all had a revelation. What, Moshe is the only prophet in the world? Va'ish Moshe Anav Ma'oid Mikol Adam. Moshe was the most humble of all men on the face of the earth. Mikol Adam of all men. Asher al Panei Ha'adama, that were on the face of the earth. Why is he the most humble of all people on the face of the earth? Because he's listening to his sister and his brother say things. We know what pasuk we're in. We're in Beha'aloscha Yud Beis pasuk Gimel, or pasuk Beis. So the pasuk over here says that Moshe, who didn't respond to his brother and sister, Moshe, who heard the embarrassing remarks that they were making about him, he didn't do what we would do. We start defending ourselves. You know, your wife says something. Oh yeah, well, you know, you did this. No, Moshe Rabbeinu didn't do anything. Moshe Rabbeinu was a savlan. Rashi says over here. Rashi says, what is an honor? What does it mean to be a humble person? Shafa means to be lowly. V'savlan, and you can bear the burden that somebody else places upon you. That's how you know that you're humble. If you could have other people, the two other greatest people in the world at the time, saying things, disparaging remarks about you, and you don't say a word, and you're soivel, and you're able to just listen to what they say and don't say anything, that will show that you are an honor, that you are a really humble person. And so Moshe Rabbeinu proves himself at that moment. And then HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes, and he comes to Moshe Rabbeinu's defense, and Miriam gets saras, and he says, there's nobody, there's nobody in my house as faithful and as trustworthy as Moshe Rabbeinu, so be careful what you say about the great Moshe Rabbeinu. That's the psukim. Now, here is the kasha yedua, here is the question that is well known. And this is from the Sefer Chidush Alev, which is of Chanoich Leibowitz, who was the Rosh Hashiva of Chavetz Chaim Yeshiva. And he says, here is the well-known question. Keitzad kosav al atzma. Remember, who writes the Torah? Who's writing the Torah? Hashem is telling Moshe which words to write in the Torah. So Hashem is telling Moshe Rabbeinu, I want you to write, Moshe, repeat after me. Yeah, write the following words. That Va'ish Moshe anav ma'oi mikol adam al panei adam. Write in those in the Torah, there's nobody in the world as humble as you, Moshe. I want you to write that down. Says the Chidush Alev. Va'ish Moshe anav ma'oi mikol adam al panei adam. And we have the other verse, Loichein avdi Moshe b'chol beisi nemanu. There's no servant as trustworthy as my servant Moshe. Kloimar sheyada shu anav agad ba'olam u'madrigasa l'mayla mishar b'nei adam. Moshe Rabbeinu understood from these words of Hashem, I'm the most humble of all people in the entire world, and there's nobody as great as me in the house of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. U'bekol zois nishar ha'adav mikol adam. Does he remain the humblest of all men? Moshe Rabbeinu is being told by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, write down in the Torah the following things. No one is as humble as you, but nobody is as great as you, Moshe. So is Moshe able to remain the humblest of all men in the world when he knows that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has said upon him, you are the greatest, most trustworthy servant in the entire world? When a parent tells over to their children, you are so fantastic. You know, the word that we all like to call our kids, tzaddik. You're such a tzaddik. You're 1 year old and you're a tzaddik. You know what a tzaddik is? The Malbim says that a tzaddik is someone who battles his Yetzer Hara in every situation and always comes out on top. A righteous man is someone who has struggles, who has internal pressures of Yetzer Hara versus Yetzer Tov, and when push comes to shove, the tzaddik will always make the right decision. He will choose the Yetzer Tov over the Yetzer Hara. So your 3-year-old kid who didn't punch his brother in the face, so yesterday he did, today he decides not to. He's a tzaddik, he's not a tzaddik, he's a 3-year-old kid, he's a little kid. So you tell the kid, you're great, you're this, you're that, all these things. Now you want the kid to remain humble. You want to remain low key. Imagine you have one of these Hollywood stars. Their heads are why? Because they read in the magazines, they see on social media, they've got hundreds of thousands of millions of followers that are following them. To watch them walk into the restaurant and order a soda. And they're watching them, and the guy's getting so excited. 1 million people just watched me order a soda. So you want that guy to be humble? When he knows that he has 1 million followers that are watching after him? It's impossible. Says the Chidush HaLev, Moshe Rabbeinu was being told right in the Torah that you are the best guy in the whole world in the eyes of Hashem. HaKadosh Baruch Hu thinks the world of you. He says there's nobody as trustworthy as you. There's nobody as great as you. There's nobody as humble as you, Moshe Rabbeinu. You want Moshe to remain the most humble man in the entire universe? After that? After he knows what HaKadosh Baruch Hu thinks about him? After Hashem praises him, gives him accolades, stands up for him in front of Miriam and Aaron HaKohen? So the kasha you do, the well-known question he writes is, how is it possible that Moshe, who's writing the Torah, could remain the most humble man in the universe when he just wrote about himself, I'm the greatest man in the universe? How does that work? It's a stira minei uvei. It's a contradiction of sorts between humility and greatness. So the Chidush HaLev says over the one answer, and he says it could be an answer, although there's another answer that he would like to say. You'll have to forgive me because I've been busy with the fundraiser all day long. I only saw the first answer. So if you want to see the second answer, I'll be humble and I'll admit. Yeah, if you want to see the rest of the Chidush HaLev, you'll have to open up to page Samich Zayin, and you'll see the other answer that he gives. But I would like to share the first answer in the Chidush HaLev because it's a common concept that we speak about, and it's important for everybody to understand. There's a Gemara that he quotes that says over the following idea. And the Gemara says like this. The Gemara says, Mishameis Rebbe, when Rebbe, the great Rebbe, Rabbeinu HaKadosh, the one who was the didactor of the Mishnayos, when he died, Batal anova v'yiras chet. Humility and the fear of sin was batal, it left the world. Rebbe was such a giant in humility and such a giant in yiras chet, in the fear of sin, that it was there was nobody else in the world afterwards that could even come close, and therefore it no longer exists in the world. However, the Gemara says over there, Amalei Rav Yosef, Latana leitisnei anava. Why are you saying over here that there's no longer humility in the world? The Ana, I'm around, said Rabbi Yosef. That sounds very humble. Amalei Rav Nachman Latana leitisnei yiras chet. How could you say there's no longer fear of sin in the world? The Ana, I'm around. I have fear of chet. So the Gemara says, humility left the world. Says Rabbi Yosef, no, then I'm still here. I'm a humble man. So obviously the question on that Gemara is, what are you talking about? Humble people don't walk around and say, hello, I'm the most humble man in the entire world. It doesn't work like that. So what was Rabbi Yosef saying? Therefore, explains the Chidush HaLev, a very famous concept in the world of anava, of humility, and that is that being a humble person doesn't mean that I am a shmata. It doesn't mean that I look down on myself and I beat myself up and I think of myself as a nothing. Like the very famous story of the Jew that walked into the Musa yeshiva and he sees everybody sitting and learning and they're crying and they're beating themselves on the table and they're bouncing up and down saying how terrible they are. And this guy walks in day number one and he says, I'm a nothing, I'm a nothing, I'm a nothing. And the other guy says, who does he think he is? Yeah, who does he think he is? He's nothing. Takes a long time to become a nothing. Doesn't become a nothing overnight. So what does it mean? It means the Gemara that says that Rabbi Yosef said, I'm still here. So if I'm still here, that means that anivas, that humility is in the world, means that an anav can understand the koichais, the powers and the potential and the talents and the abilities that they have. They can realize that there is inherent greatness that is inside of them. Because if you don't realize, like we spoke about several times on Shabbos, if you don't realize what you have inside of you, you'll never succeed. You'll never accomplish. Right now, my father-in-law, Baruch Hashem, came home from the hospital finally after many, many months, for 4 months, he was not home. And with miracle after miracle after miracle, there are many, many things that cleared up in his medical history that just no doctor in the world can figure out what's going on over here. Nothing at all makes sense. Everything is l'maylam and ateva, above the laws of nature. But when you lay in a bed for 4 months and your body was ripped apart, ripped to shreds, and you haven't been doing that much activity, you can understand that getting up, standing, walking, striding, not so easy for a person to do. And so now, at the ripe old age of 85 years old, after going through an extremely traumatic experience where he literally was on the edge of death many, many times, he now has to be retrained how to remusculize, if that's such a word, himself, get his muscles working again, get his standing abilities, get his walking abilities, all those things. He has to get them moving again. Otherwise, he will be resigned to lying in a bed or sitting in a chair until Mashiach will come. So what's the chizuk? The first day that he tried to stand up, he was in so much pain, he collapsed. So how does this man know that he's going to be able to stand up again? Because the next day that they stood him up, although that it was painful, it was not as painful as the day before. And instead of collapsing, he was able to stand up for 10 seconds. Then he collapsed. And it took already several weeks for him to get comfortable that he felt, I'm firm enough on my legs, I could stay here. And I tell him, you have to walk. I can't walk, he says. You could walk. I can't walk. Yes, you could, you can. So then they show him, they help him move one of his legs. And it moves. So he believes now that his leg can move. Then they help him with the other leg, and the other leg starts moving. And you see on his face, my wife is there, or somebody was there with the video, you see on his face, he realized, I could walk. I didn't know that I could walk anymore because I've been lying in the bed for 4 months. I could walk. Now, he's not running, he's not jogging yet. Bez Hashem, he's going to get stronger and stronger. But if you don't know what you have inside of you, the abilities, then you will just believe that I can't do such a thing, I can't accomplish. So in order for a person to be victorious in this world, in order for a person to grow, for a person to be able to reach new levels and heights, they must understand who they are, and they must understand the koiches, the abilities that are inside of them. And if not, they'll never succeed. Rav Yosef said, why are you saying there's nobody who's an anav anymore? I'm an anav. He wasn't gloating that he was a humble man. He knew himself. He knew what he'd worked on. He knew what he developed inside of his inner recesses of his soul. He knew that he worked and he worked and he worked with all of his great tutelage and his wisdom and his chachma. He knew what he did to himself. He made sure that he's always humble, always. I think I told him the story once when we were learning the words of humility of Rav Chaim Kanievsky. One of the great Bali Musa was of Itzla of Petersburg. Great Bali Musa. He was one of Rav Yisrael Salanter's main disciples. And he once came to a big asif, a big gathering of all the Rabbanim in Europe. And I believe it was when Chaim Brisker got up to give a shir to all of the Rabbanim. And he gave a shir and he asked the kasha, he asked what we call a bomb kasha, a massive question on something in the Gemara. And he wanted the Rabbanim to come up with the answer to this question. And so all the Rabbanim are yelling back and forth, fighting it out, duking it out, who's right, who knows the answer. And Reb Chaim is watching, he's getting very excited by seeing all of the back and forth between the great Rabbanim of Klal Yisrael. And there's one Yid, Rav Itzel of Petersburg, sitting over there on the side. And as he's sitting on the side, he is just sitting like this. Looks like a daimim, looks like a rock. He doesn't say anything. And Rav Chaim says, this is the great Rav Itzel of Petersburg, the main disciple of Rav Yisrael Salanter. When in the middle of where everybody is arguing and they say he's a Talmid Chacham, he doesn't say a word, he just sits there like a sheep. So at the end, all the Rabbanim tried their hand to answer the question. Nobody had the right answer. Rav Chaim then gives over a masterful answer. When the conference is over, he says, I have to figure out who is this Rav Itzel. He has a sefer called Pri Yitzchak, called The Fruit of Yitzchak. He didn't have any children with his first wife. He was an older man. So he wrote a sefer, Pri Yitzchak. These are my fruits of my labor. These are like my children. In that book, Rav Chaim looks and he sees the kasha that he asked to all of the Rabbanim. And then he looks and he sees that Rav Itzel of Petersburg answered the same exact answer as him. He knew he was. He didn't have to raise it. Oh, I'll tell you the answer. I know the answer. He did not want to steal the thunder from Reb Chaim, the Gadol Ador at the time. Why would he do such a thing? I don't need to prove myself. I know I am. I know what I have on the inside of me. And therefore says the Chidush Alev that humility does not mean that I am a nothing. It doesn't mean that I don't recognize what I have inside of me. On the other hand, it means that because that I recognize all of the greatness that I have inside, I realize how much I am obligated to do for the Rebbeinu Shalom. And a person that is obligated to do for the Rebbeinu Shalom knows you could never, ever do enough. You'll never exceed what you could have done in this world. You will never achieve levels that you could possibly achieve because a person is going to be obligated constantly to be working. That's what he says. It's really based on the words of the Horowitz. The Horowitz says the language of this pasuk is very interesting. It says about Moshe Rabbeinu that what? Ha'ish Moshe anav me'oid was very humble, as Chazal pointed out. It's not enough just to be a little bit humble. You have the anav ma'oid, right? Like we said from the Rambam. The Rambam says that every single meter should be derech emtsoy, the middle of the road, except gaiva. Gaiva, there's no room for hardiness at all in a person's life. Not an ounce. Only in one certain case, when a person has to defend HaKadosh Baruch Hu, maybe give you a little stolzi. Besides that, there's no room for gaiva. So that means that the opposite extreme is anav ma'oid, like Moshe Rabbeinu, very, very humble. Mikola Adam, from all men, ashal pnei Adam, but that are on the face of the earth. Ask the Horowitz, what other men would he be more humble than? The Martians from Mars? Moshe Rabbeinu was the most humble of all men on the face of the earth. Of course he's on the face of the earth. Where else does mankind reside? They reside here on earth. So what is the pasuk adding over here when it tells me that Moshe Rabbeinu was the humblest of all men on the face of the earth? Says the Eilig Horowitz Chaim, was Moshe only residing on earth? We know that when Moshe Rabbeinu received the Torah, Moshe went up to Har Sinai, and he stood before HaKadosh Baruch Hu 40 days and 40 nights. He didn't drink, he did not eat, he did not sleep. He was busy learning and learning and learning. And who was up there in the Shemaim together with him? The Malachim, the angels. So for 40 days of his life, Moshe transcended the physical world. He went up into a realm that was above the laws of nature. It was heavenly. He was learning. He didn't eat, he didn't sleep, he didn't drink. He was learning. He was arguing with the Malachim, with the angels to bring the Torah down to this world. And he was in a different realm of existence altogether. He came back down to this world. He's not the same man anymore. It's like when these boys are coming back from Eretz Yisrael, like we spoke about other weeks. The boy was living in Yerushalayim for the last year. there's Kedusha. He didn't see one billboard on Ventura Boulevard for a year. Could you imagine? For 1 year not having to see a single billboard. He was in a yeshiva, they don't let iPhones. Could you imagine not having an iPhone for a whole year? Could you imagine? What a blessing it would be. He didn't have to deal with a lot of the spiritual toxins that we have over here. So for 1 year, he's there in the holiest places, in a bubble, in a vacuum, being concealed and being taken care of, being insulated by the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael. Then he comes back to America. When he comes back to America, this kid is not the same kid anymore. When he walks back into his home and he sees some, sports page lying around, he bamish runs to the mikveh because he can't believe what's happening over here. There was one of the chashiva young rebbes in the world is a yid by the name of Simai Zilberstein. And he is an ish kadosh ad ma'id, very holy person. And he protects himself from anything that will stare, anything that will get in the way of his kedusha. Now, with the story that I will tell you right now, you can't understand the story because we don't live in that world. First things first, there are many, many Jews in America that want him to come to America. But he has a hakpada, he has a strict way in which he lives, and that is that he will never be within Dalet Amos of a woman that's not his wife or his daughter, or maybe his mother, maybe his grandmother. So how can he go on a plane when there's women that are sitting all around? How can he go on the plane? Even if you tell me he'll have a row, just him and his gabayim, how can he be on the plane? So he made a deal. He said, you want me to come to America? He said, I can only come to America if I fly first class, and nobody else can be in first class with me. Private jet, that would work. Private jet would work. It would work. But the way that it works over here is they buy all of the seats in first class, and he has his gabayim that are there together with him. He's, our chazan on the Yom Neroim, Rabbi Slu. Rabbi Slu is a student of his. And he said he once traveled with him from Eretz Yisrael to America, something like that. And they flew together, the two of them in first class, nobody else around. He said he brought so many svarim. They were he's carrying bricks like this. So many books he brought onto the plane because he just learns and learns and learns and learns and learns. So now this man came to America. He's a man who goes to the mikveh sometimes several times a day for Kedusha. He barely sleeps, he barely eats, he learns all day long. Again, this is not for you to try at home. This is where Rav C. Meyer is holding, he's on that level. He came to Lakewood and he was supposed to speak in the Lakewood Yeshiva. And as Hasidish time goes, it's never Litvish time. So it means in the yeshiva, they're expecting to come and speak at 12 o'clock. And already at 12:06, he's running late. The car was just pulling up to the yeshiva. Car pulls up. He opens the door to get out of the car. And as he opens the door and pulls out of the car, a car of gangbangers drives by in Lakewood, New Jersey, and it's blasting rap music. And the car drives by, and Rabbi Zilberstein closes the door to the car, and he says to the driver, take me to the mikveh immediately. They said, Rebbe, there's about 1,000 people in the room waiting for you to come and speak, and we're already late. So he said, after what I just heard, there's no way that I will be able to say a shir. So take me to the mikveh. Hopefully it will work, and I'll come back and I'll be able to speak. A person is on a zamadrega on such a level, and he tries to come down to this world over here. He's in a different stratosphere. The girls from Beis Yaakov, when they go to Eretz Yisrael and they starken up, also they have the same thing. They come back home and they see the mother and they hear what she's talking about, and they see her on her WhatsApp chewing her big bubble gum over there. They also start to freak out. What's going on over here? How am I going to deal with this? Moshe Rabbeinu was not in Eretz Yisrael for 1 year. He was in Shemayim for 40 days with HaKadosh Baruch Hu and his Shechina and Malachei Hashars and Malachim. And he was talking to the Malachim, defending the right to bring the Torah down to the earth. Says the Pasuk, Moshe came down from Har Sinai. He came down out of the Shemayim. He came down to this earth. Moshe Rabbeinu knew he is the Anav, he called Adam, Asher Al Panei Adama, because I was living with the angels, I was living with the Shekhinah, I was living in heaven. I'm not the same person anymore, not like everybody else in this world. And therefore, now you brought me back into this world, and I'm around the Panei Adama, the people of the world. I saw the truth. I saw a higher level of existence. Certainly, Moshe Rabbeinu now is the most humblest of man in the entire world. Which means, as the Chidush Aleif points out, the greater recognition that you have of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the greater your understanding of the greatness and the vastness and the depth of Torah is. The more that you are ruchnius and you see how the importance of ruchnius over the gashmius of this world, so then the more you are going to realize that whatever you are accomplishing in your ways of avodas Hashem, it pales in comparison to the Rebbeinu Shalom. So why is a person a humble person? Humility is not because I'm a shmata, not because I'm a nothing, but because between me and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is a distance of light years away. And as great as my accomplishments might be, as many are my deeds, as much as Torah as I might have learned, but it's clear to me, says the humble person, I'm nothing compared to Hashem. And therefore, since all of the covet, all of the glory belongs to the Rebbeinu Shalom, so then how is it possible that I could get myself to be a haughty individual and not remain humble in the eyes of Hashem? The more that you recognize the greatness, the more humble that you are. For example, why is part of our Masorah, why is part of our transmission of the Torah, why did that have to be from Rebbe to Talmud, from a teacher to a student? Because that's the most convenient way to learn. You just ask Alexa, she'll tell you what's the pshat in the Gemara. Ask Siri, what is Tosfos talking about? Well, according to Rabbi Akiva Eiger, Tosfos means this. Yeah, she'll tell you. So what do you need a Rebbe for? Get a book. Art School has translated everything. Not everything, Alicia, yeah? They translated everything. So you don't need Hebrew books anymore on the shelf. If your Hebrew is not so good, you don't even need a dictionary anymore. You just open up the Art School, everything is right there. So what does a Talmud, why does a student need a Rebbe anymore? You can figure it all out on yourself. And the answer is because every single person always needs to see someone that's above them, that's greater than them, that's loftier than them, that knows more Torah than them, that is smarter than them, that has more accomplishments than them. To keep us humble, to make us realize, wow, my Rebbe, he has Shas on his fingertips. My Rebbe, look, he raised X amount of children and look how calm he is. My Rebbe, look what he does for Klal Yisrael. Look how he takes on the burden of all of his old students. He has hundreds of thousands of students. I remember when Berkowitz came, maybe one of the first times to visit us after we'd moved to Los Angeles. And we were learning in the Koilon. And we were only 6 guys there, but he had maybe 100,000 of students elsewhere. And he was a relatively young man at the time, and we saw that he had some gray hairs in his beard. So we were joking, okay, that one's for me, and that one's for me, and that's because I called him about this. You have to have people that are greater, above you all the time. Otherwise, you think that you're God's gift to the world. And so HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, the only way Torah is going to be transmitted from one generation to the next generation is Rebbe to Talmud. So that you're always looking up. Like the Rosh writes in Orchos Chaim, the Rosh writes that a person should never look to the people beneath him for the example of what to be. Rather, they should always look to the people that are above them for the example of what to be. Because if there's people that are above you and you're learning from them and you're looking up at them, then you will always be striving to become something greater than you are right now. When you look to people below you, this is such an easy cop-out in our own avodas Hashem. We look at the guy in shul who's doing less than we are, and we say, I do much more than him. Why are you looking at the one who's doing less? You're supposed to be looking at the one who's doing more than you and say, oi, this guy's doing so much more than me. I could also be doing more. And he says over, the Panovich Rav says on those words of the Rosh, he says, that's why we find by children and adults two different ways of life. An adult is rarely growing and rarely changing and rarely making any differences, a real impact in his life. He's kind of just going along, complacent. He does what he does. He davens how he davens. He learns how he learns. He does chesed how he does chesed. He gives tzedakah the way he gives tzedakah. He does what he does. That's an adult. And yet you look at a child, and a child, from the time that they're able to start moving around, they try to move around and do more things. They're sitting, they fall on their stomach, they try to crawl. From crawling, they try to walk. It's time to eat. What does a baby do? Most babies, they'll push away. At a certain point, they start pushing away the hand of the mother and father. They want to eat by themselves. It goes into their eye. It goes into their ear. They don't care. The point is they want to do it by themselves. Why does a little child want to do everything by himself when he could have somebody else do it for him? Says the Panovich Rav, you know why? Because he's looking at adults all of his life. And he's watching adults who are walking. He's watching adults that are eating. He's watching adults that are drinking. He's watching adults that are talking to each other. So when this little infant sees an adult who is much more advanced than he is doing all these things, that's his role model. That's what he wants to become. But adults, average adults, we're all the same. So our urge, our drives to grow are much less. The whole way that a person is going to learn in the proper manner is when there's a Rebbe that's on top and there's a Talmud and you're the student below. Because that means I'm looking up and I'm admiring what he accomplished. I'm admiring his wisdom, his midos, his Torah. And then it motivates me to do more. Says the Chedush Alev, it's based loosely on the words of the Chavetz Chaim over here. And that is that Moshe Rabbeinu, when he came down to this world, Moshe Rabbeinu was not a man who said to himself, I'm just like everybody else in this world, I just happen to be a little greater. Moshe said, I was living with Malachim for 40 days. I was with the Shechina Kadesha, HaKadosh Baruch Hu was talking to me for 40 days up there in the heavens. I didn't eat a ginger. I divested myself of my physical needs. And as a result, when I come down to this world, I'm never the same person anymore. And I no longer look at myself like everybody else in the world. I'm the humblest of all of the men of Pnei Ha'adama because I lived amongst the angels that were in the heaven. You can't even compare me to a person in this world. They didn't see what I saw. They didn't experience what I experienced. They didn't see the greatness of Kedusha the way that I did. And therefore, I come back down here, I look at myself like I'm like nothing. And the similar story with Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and his son, Rabbi Lazar. When they went into the cave, they were there for 13 years. And they were learning and learning and learning and learning. And they were buried up to their neck in dirt because they only had one pair of clothes that they say for davening and for Shabbos. So the whole day they were under the dirt, buried. They didn't have any clothing on. There was a carob tree. There was a little stream of water that came. They had nothing. 13 years they were living in a world that was completely separate from this universe. And when they walked out into the world after all of those years, what was the first thing they did? They burned people up to smithereens by looking at them. Because they couldn't tolerate that they were on such a high level and everybody else was like animals. You're running around talking about the price of gas. Think about how many conversations have we had about the price of gas in the last few weeks? Oh, it's ridiculous. It's crazy. This president, what does he do? We have nothing else to talk about. Imagine Shimon Bar Yochai walks out of the cave and he hears people talking about climate control. Wow. The earth would have opened up. They would have been swallowed inside. So they were on this high madriga, and Hashem said, get back in the cave. Is that what you think your life is all about? That you should be this holier than thou person who looks down on the rest of the world? You lived a transcendent existence in the cave for 13 years. You saw things other people didn't see. Humble yourself and realize that you were privy to see into the greatness of Torah that nobody else saw. That should make you the humblest of all men on earth. Go back into the cave and learn how to make that ruminate inside of yourself, and then you can come back into the world. And then after another year in the cave, Rav Shimon Bar Yochai came out of the cave and he looked around and he sees a Yid running with Hadassim in his hands. And he says, where are you going? And he says, Shabbos is coming. I'm running home for Shabbos. He says, what do you have those for? He says, fragrance. He says, why do you have two? He says, Shomer v'Zachor. Because it says in the Torah, Shomer, guard the Shabbos, and Zachor, remember the Shabbos. Oh, wow, says Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, a Yid, such a holy Jew. He's running home for Shabbos. He could have gotten one Hadassah. Said he got two of them because he wants to remind himself, Shomer v'Zachor. That's Klal Yisrael. Humbled himself. He's able to see the good in others. Moshe Rabbeinu asked the Chidush HaLev, how is it shaykh? How is it possible that he remained a humble man after Hashem said, you're so great? There's nobody in my whole house, says Hashem, in Hashem's house. Not about Hashem's beach house. It's not a Kodesh Baruch Hu's house in Switzerland. It's the base Hashem, the house of Hashem. Nobody is as neman, as faithful as you, Moshe Rabbeinu. How did he say humble after that? Because he said, you know why I was so faithful? You know why I was so dedicated to the cause? Because I was up there in Shemayim with the angels. I saw what it's all about. I saw the world. Nobody else saw the world like I saw the world. It's a gift that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave me. When he comes back down to this world, Moshe Rabbeinu is the humblest of all men on the face of the earth because they can't even understand what Moshe Rabbeinu saw. And therefore Hashem says, write it in. Write it, Moshe, write you're humble. Yeah, but Hashem, I'm humble. Come, Moshe, you know what it means. It means that a humble person can recognize the koiches, their strengths. A humble person can recognize the abilities that they have. A humble person can recognize their brains, right? Rabbi Yisrael Salanter once came up with a chiddush that was so big in learning, he froze in his place and he said, I just realized I have the brain capacity of 1,000 men. And if Hashem gave me the brain capacity of 1,000 men, he wants the avodas Hashem of 1,000 men as well. He recognizes brain power. He recognizes greatness. Rav Chaim Kanievsky didn't know who he was. He didn't realize that if the whole world is coming to his doorstep and they're asking for his brother, he didn't know who he was. He knew who he was. That's why when you would walk into his house, it was no airs about him. It was he was from the humblest of all men on the face of the earth because he knew what he had, but he also knew that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is so much greater than that. So to know your greatness is the only way that you'll succeed. But my greatness compared to HaKadosh Baruch Hu's greatness is very limited. Pales in comparison. My greatness compared to my Rebbe's is nothing. It's nothing. My brains, my davening, my midas, my character, my chesed, compared to my Rebbe, compared to my Rosh Hashiva, compared to my parents, it's nothing. It's nothing compared. Compared to Hashem, it's really nothing. But so the nothingness aspect of it motivates me to keep working hard. But the fact that I recognize the greatness and the good things that I have inside of me, that itself keeps me confident about what I'm doing. It allows me to keep going forward. You have to have confidence in this world to succeed. In the language of the Bali Musa, we find it in Orchos Tzadikim. There's something that's called like a gaiva shebekidusha. It's a haughtiness of kedusha, which means that when you need to do the right thing, because that's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants you to do, you can't walk around like this. You have to walk around confident. I'm doing Ratzon Hashem right now. I'm doing like the Rabbi Yonah writes in his Yigeres HaTshuva, or Yesod HaTshuva, he writes over there, there's a mitzvah called Suda Shlishis, which means that the mitzvah for a person to wash and to have a meal at the end of the day. He says, but we find, the videos go like 1,000 years, we find people by the end of Shabbos, oh, I can't eat. He says, what happens if you end up in somebody's house? Shabbos afternoon, it's one of those short Shabbosim where by 4:15 you have to wash again for Suda Shlishis. And you just finished lunch at 3 o'clock. And the cholent is like just right about here, hasn't even made its way down yet. And the chocolate is still in your mouth from the 3 bowls of ice cream that you had. And then, of course, you had to have, some caramel corn or something else just to take the flavor out of your mouth. You can't eat a bite. And the host is lying on the couch. Oh. But you look at the clock and you see there's a mitzvah to eat Suda Shlishis. So you say, Rabbi Yid, I don't know to tell you, but soon it's going to be shki, we have to wash. Oh, come on. He says, who has Suda Shlishis in the wintertime? Says Rabbi Yonah, gird yourself at that moment and don't be embarrassed and don't be ashamed. There's a mitzvah called Suda Shlishis. It's just an example that he's giving. Even if other people are not going to do the mitzvah, you be strong and you be confident and you do the mitzvah. Many people are embarrassed to say Asher Yatzar when they walk out of the bathroom in a public place. They're embarrassed. You have people that you can't even see that they have these things in their ears and they're just walking around talking to themselves like maniacs. Everybody looks like they're lunatics in the world today, talking to themselves. So that nobody's embarrassed about. Sometimes like you walk into a place and you see a guy, yeah, I know. Talking to me? Yeah. What's going on over here? This guy's looking at me. And then you see he's got this little tiny thing in his ear over there and he's talking to somebody else on his phone. That he's not embarrassed about. He looks like a lunatic for talking to himself. You're going to talk to Hashem. You're going to get out of the bathroom in a public area. There's goyim all around you. And you're going to talk to Hashem. You're embarrassed about that? You're embarrassed to talk to Hashem? What are you embarrassed about? You're talking to the master of the universe. So says the Orchos Tzadikim, you have to have what's called Gaivish Kedusha, which means that I could be standing in LAX after a long flight. The airport is packed. I walk out of the bathroom. Instead of being one of those guys, okay, let's go. Yeah. I stand there and I say a bracha, a real bracha, because I'm talking to Hashem. I don't have to be embarrassed. You don't have to be embarrassed about any mitzvahs that you do. You don't have to be embarrassed about any decision that you make that are for the l'shem, l'man Hashem, for the sake of Hashem. And therefore, anivos, humility, does not mean that I'm a nothing. Humility does not mean that I'm a shmata. It doesn't mean that I have nothing to offer to this world. It means that it starts by recognizing I have a lot to offer. I have a lot of good things. I have a lot of good traits. I have a lot of strengths. I have a lot of abilities. But compared to my rebellion, not as much. Compared to my uncle who's the Rosh Yeshiva of that big yeshiva, not as much. Compared to the Rebbeinu Shalom, or let's go generation, compared to the Chavetz Chaim, no way. Compared to the Vilna Gaon, no way. Compared to Rabbi Akiva, no way. Go all the way back to our Sinai. Compared to Hashem, no way I have enough. And there's so much more that I could do. And if a person thinks like that, at the two things at the same time, on one hand, I have so much kaiches that Hashem gave me. On the other hand, I never use enough. And then I'll stay humble but yet confident. I'll be secure, yet I'll be a savlan like Moshe Rabbeinu. He was able to hear the nasty comments said about him. It didn't bother him. He didn't let it get in his way. And you'll be able to continue to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu in everything that you do. And this is why he says, the famous question of Moshe Rabbeinu, how could you write in the Torah that Hashem thinks you're the greatest person in the entire universe and still be humble? Moshe says, it's not a steer, it's not a contradiction. I know that in this world, I am the greatest person in this world. That's the way that Hashem positioned me. That's the way that Hashem made me. But I saw things that nobody else saw. And therefore, I keep myself as humble as can be. So a sign of humility is how we have to begin to gauge ourselves. The sign of our humility is how much we are able to, on one hand, recognize the good that we have inside of ourselves, not become haughty as a result of it, and yet continue to work hard to become better and bigger and stronger every day in the eyes of Hashem. If we're working in that way, so then you know that you are you're a humble person. If a person looks at all the milas, all the good things they have, all the strengths they have, all the abilities, and that becomes what they think about when they think about themselves, and they don't think about the Rebbe, they don't think about the Gadol, they don't think about HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then they're traveling into the world of gaiva, of hardiness. Hardiness only to keep us strong in the face of spiritual adversity. Humility, like Moshe Rabbeinu, is onav ma'oid mikol adam. He was the most humblest of all people, because humility is something that you can never err on the side of wrong with, I guess, which means we always have to try to bring greater levels of humility to our lives. On that note, we will conclude the class. We have an important campaign to go and run. It's not me, it's HaKadosh Baruch Hu running the campaign. And Be'ez Hashem Yisbarach, we will be successful. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi Horowitz.
Pleasure.